Hi, everybody. My name's Megan. I'm an English instructor at Wake Tech and also a tutor in the Wake Tech TLC. I tutor writing and study skills. And this workshop is called Promoting Originality, How to Prevent Plagiarism. So there are lots of different ways to plagiarize, but overall what it means is taking somebody's work and presenting it as your own. The first thing that we're going to do is you're going to take a pretest. There will be a link available for you to click to take that pretest just so we can gauge how much you already know about this topic. But then at the post test, you want to make sure you do the best you can. Also, taking the pre and the post proves that you were here for this workshop and it will record that information. So take a couple moments to do that and pause the video. So, what brings you here today? Was there a specific incident of plagiarism that your instructor referred you here for? Were you just interested in learning more?
Apparently, I can't put stuff in from other sources without doing an in-text citation. I had all
Mm,
my citations at the end of the paper. I thought I was covered, but that I now understand is a mistake.
got it. Yes, we will talk more about that. It's true that you have to list all the sources at the end of your paper, all the different websites or books that you used. But yes, you also have to notate where in your paper you used the information from that source. And there's lots of different ways to cite, different formats. We don't get into all those specific details in this workshop, but I will show you where you will put in text citation and kind of generally how it looks. All right, for those of you watching the video, same question. Think about that. What brings you here today? And think about how what we talk about in this workshop is going to apply to your specific situation. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about more what plagiarism is. Um, as I mentioned before, anytime when you take someone else's words or ideas and try to pass them off as your own without notating that in some way, that is plagiarism. So for example, even if someone changed a few words from a social media post of yours, that would still be plagiarism. You would recognize, hey, I just posted that and now you've stolen it. That was my meme. How dare you? So even if you change a couple words around, the same thing would apply for something that you may take and put in your English paper. You can't just change a couple words and then pretend it's yours. It's very important to make sure you give credit. So as I just said, plagiarism is using someone else's ideas, words, or work without giving credit, or in a way that breaks the rules of the class. So every class is going to be a little bit different as far as what that instructor will call plagiarism, especially when we're getting into all the different forms of generative AI. Some instructors are going to have different policies about that. So it's very important to make sure that you read your syllabus and you ask your instructor questions about what qualifies as plagiarism in your class, whether that's a computer class or an English class or a math class. Very important to keep that in mind. So now we're going to go through several possible examples, and I will have you, my marvelous audience, tell me which of these you think is plagiarism or not. So the first one, websites or programs that check grammar, such as Word, Grammarly.
I think probably not for that because they only tell you how to like change your spelling or like where to add a comma. That doesn't make it not my work.
That's a really good point, and that's a good point that we'll be coming back to. As long as it's your idea, as long as it's your voice, usually it's okay to get help from an outside source such as Grammarly. But you need to be careful. Sometimes Grammarly, and especially if you try to use a generative AI platform like ChatGPT, they may try to change your voice. So you should need to be more careful when you utilize some of the more robust ones that are available now. All right, the next one, using ChatGPT to write a complete draft of an essay.
That sounds like cheating.
Yeah, if it does the whole thing for you, then you haven't really done any of the work yourself. It's not your own voice, it's not your own ideas. Very good point. All right, pasting from a source and forgetting to cite it.
That's what I did. But I thought since I was paraphrasing that I was
Hmm.
safe.
Yeah, and this can be a tricky that balance between what is paraphrasing and safe and not. It can be challenging, and it also can vary based on the class. For example, if there's information that's considered common knowledge, like whoever the current president of the United States is, or a certain very well-known scientific principle, for some classes, as long as you paraphrase that information, it may be okay for you to not necessarily cite it, as long as you put it in your own words, simply because it's common knowledge. But that's again why you should always check with your instructor just to be sure. But in general, if you take information from a source, you should cite it, even if you paraphrase, and you'll never get in trouble for citing it. So when in doubt, always cite. Even if you're like, oh, I don't know, is this common knowledge? I'm not sure. You can always get some help, or if there's no time, just cite it. Better off that way.
Okay.
All right, next, getting assistance from the TLC, the Tutoring and Learning Center.
That can't be plagiarism or you guys wouldn't exist.
It's a very good point. We will touch on later on one time when it is not okay to get help from the TLC, or maybe that's in a different workshop. Yes, in our academic integrity workshop, we talk about a time when it's not okay to get help from the TLC, which is with a final exam or final project or test. That's the only time when it is not considered ethical to get help from the TLC. Otherwise, absolutely. That is what the TLC is there for. We will help you without changing your voice. All right, forgetting to use quotation marks.
Well, I know that's not a good idea because then people can't tell which words are mine and which words are somebody else's.
Yeah, and you may forget and maybe an honest mistake, but unfortunately you can still get points taken off or even fail a paper for forgetting. So visit the TLC, ask your instructor for feedback. Always make sure you double check that you've got quotes around anything that comes from another source. And it's important to have quotes on both sides of the quote. A lot of times I meet with students and they put the first round of quotes, but then they don't ever end it. So I never know when that quote ends. So it's very important to make sure you do that. All right, paraphrasing incorrectly, which means changing a few words.
I don't know. I don't understand why that isn't okay. Why isn't that okay?
So the idea with paraphrasing is, well, honestly, that that point there is a little unclear actually, because when you paraphrase, you should cite, unless it's that common knowledge, which can vary by class. So it's important to check with your instructor. The time when it would be like the only time it would be okay to paraphrase and not cite it would be, again, if it was common knowledge or you change the wording so much that it is no longer that person's idea anymore. It is now your idea. So say, for example, you read something in a book and you think, huh, that's interesting. What if we did this instead? So it's now your own total idea. Pretty much any other time, you would have to cite it. So even if you paraphrased incorrectly by only changing a few words, you would still be citing it anyway. So yes, that one's a little confusing. All right, next, reusing old papers without permission.
But if I wrote them, why does that matter?
That's a very good question. It is called self-plagiarism. I know. And it's something that's very difficult. A lot of students don't know about this, and a lot of instructors don't necessarily cover it. So it's important to be aware of that. Using portions of old papers, using the entire old paper without citing it, is incorrect because it is not you doing that work right now. For example, I had a friend in college who reused her English papers from high school. That is not measuring where she currently is as a student. It's measuring who she was as a high schooler, but it's not really gauging where she is right now in this current English class. So it is not an accurate statement about who she is as a student in that moment. So it's important to make sure you're always doing original work. Again, unless, of course, you check with your instructor, you let them know, hey, I wrote a paper about this in high school. Can I do this, this, this? If they say yes, then you're good. But you should always check because there are plagiarism checkers in Blackboard that will check your paper against all other papers that have been submitted to that database. So if your paper from high school or your paper from last semester was submitted into turnitin.com, it will register the entire thing as plagiarized. So you could be in a lot of trouble.
Okay.
All right, having a friend help write your paper.
Well, I know a friend is wrong, but what about my mom? My mom always helps me write my papers.
So this is where it can be tricky because just like getting help from the TLC isn't plagiarism, it isn't unethical. It could maybe be okay to get help from a parent, but the problem is they won't know when they've crossed that line into taking over your paper. The TLC knows how to help support you as a writer to write your paper without taking over. A lot of times, if you get help from a friend or a family member, they'll say, oh, I think this is a better idea. Let's do it like this instead. And suddenly, it's no longer your own words anymore. It's no longer your own idea. They've totally taken over. Um, that's why you should always be really wary about getting help from family or friends with a paper. And also, they may not understand the assignment as well. I've definitely seen some students who said they had a parent or a friend help them. I was like, this doesn't follow the assignment at all, actually, because that person's not in the class, so they don't really know. All right. Having a friend or family member point out parts of the essay that are confusing or need revision.
That seems okay because we do stuff like that in peer review in class.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So this is the part where it is more okay. It's still, you got to be wary because you don't know for sure, again, if that person is kind of overstepping. But generally it can be okay as long as it's not more than a couple of things. And if they aren't telling you how to fix it, such as if they say this part is confusing and they don't tell you how to fix it, you should be okay from there for sure. Nicely done. You picked out all the plagiarism parts. All right. So now we're going to talk about a few of the ways that the internet and modern technology has made it even more tempting to cheat. Obviously, we have generative AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot. There's also websites that can change the words around in sources. If you weren't aware of that, um, there are websites that will do that as a service. You can copy and paste something from one article and it will just swap the words around. And that may make someone think, oh, well, it's not the same words anymore. It's okay. But it's still not your idea. It may be different from the original source, but it's not your idea. Obviously, websites that offer papers for purchase or for someone to write your paper for you is not ethical. And it's also not okay to have Google Translate write an entire paper. I think this is something where, again, you should ask your instructor if you are someone who is not a native English speaker and you want to use Google Translate to help you write, you'll need to check with your instructor to see how much or how little of that is allowed. Because again, it's not going to present who you are as a student. If Google Translate is translating your entire paper, it's not really an accurate presentation of you. Any questions about all this?
No, that makes sense.
Okay. So a little bit more in depth about AI usage. There are some university-wide, college-wide policies in place at Wake Tech and in other locations, but mainly you need to check with your instructor. A lot of detailed instructions about AI will come from your instructor. So make sure that you are very, 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 very familiar with what your instructor says about AI, because whatever the college policy says, your instructor may have more stringent rules. There are some instructors who say no AI use at all, and others may have assignments where you're told to use AI. So it's very, very important that you make sure you check with your instructor about AI usage. And you may say, well, why does it matter? I'll probably get away with it anyway. You might, but you might not. It's not worth risking it. There are a lot of instructors who are very, very serious about their AI policies. So it's very important to make sure that you adhere to that policy. And talk with your instructor about it. Don't try to hide it. If you try to hide it, it just gets worse. If you're struggling, be open with your instructor about, what you feel you need AI for. If there was something you used it for in high school or at another school, talk with your instructor. They'll give you some support. Um, it can be really tempting, especially if you're feeling lost and confused and you don't know what to do. But we've got all kinds of resources available, the TLC or instructors. Please reach out to them first. It's very important. So not only is plagiarism um, ethically wrong. Not only does it breach, your academic integrity, it's also a big violation of Wake Tech policy. And depending upon the severity of the issue, you could get a 0 on the assignment, or you could fail the class, especially for a repeat issue. So it's very important to avoid plagiarism and make sure that you talk with your instructor about it so you have a clear understanding. All right, now we're getting into the issue that you came with today. When do I cite? How do I cite it? And as I mentioned before, if you're unsure, always cite it. And as I mentioned before, it's going to vary based on the class what kinds of citation expectations there will be. So make sure, again, always check with your instructor. So here are some reasons why we cite information in papers when you write. Or, if you're using graphic design, whatever it is you're creating as a student, the reason you cite it is you are inserting your words into a conversation with others in that field. So if you're writing an English paper, for example, you are conversing with other people who have written about the same topic. If you're writing about biology, your experiment is being spoken with alongside other experiments. So by using those sources in your paper, you are becoming a part of the academic discipline that you're in. Now, whatever class you're in, you maybe be thinking, oh God, I have to take this class so I can graduate. But there is this academic portion of it as well. You got to imagine if you were going to publish this somewhere out on the internet, you want to make sure that you're accurately presenting what you say and what other people say as well. So it's important to make sure that your readers can always tell what are your words, what are sources from other outside areas, and where did that come from? And that's when you get down to your works cited or your references page, where it lists all the different people that you use in your paper. So we'll talk a little bit more about how to identify those sources. And the way you do that is with documentation. So you'll have a list of sources. As we mentioned, it'll be different depending upon the format of your project, but it'll typically be on a page at the end of your paper or project. There's also in-text citations, which for most formats, MLA and APA, you'll have parentheses with an author's last name, maybe with a page number or a year. Again, it's going to vary based on the discipline that you're in. But that in-text citation will directly correspond to one of the citations down at the end of your document. So it's important to make sure those match. Anything that's in your in-text citation should be in your list of sources. And again, the way that it's formatted will be different depending upon your subject. So come see us if you've got more questions about how to do a certain type of in-text citation. We can help with that. And signal phrases, that is how you integrate your words into the quote that you're about to use. You may say something like, according to John Smith, blah, 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 blah. Or according to research done by the National Institute of Mental Health, blah, 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 blah. That way your readers are going to have some indication that you're transitioning. You don't just want to have a sentence of yours and then quotes and then a sentence of somebody else's with a citation. And they're like, what is that? Who is that? I don't know. How does that relate to what was just being said? Those signal phrases are very important. Any questions about any of this?
Does the signal phrase always have to go before the quote, or could it come after?
It's a good question. Some instructors have different ideas about how it should be. Some instructors say you must say the entire author's name and the entire name of the article before you have a citation. Other instructors, like me, for example, I'm typically okay with you putting it in there anywhere. I think the reason a lot of times instructors want you to put it before the quote is that your readers are just going to know before they get to the quote, who is this? But yes, typically you'll put it at the beginning, but some instructors are more flexible and you can put it anywhere you like. As long as there is credit given somewhere around that quote, you should be good. Good question. So some strategies that make citation easier. One, make sure that you save source information as you go. I cannot say how many times students have come in and they cannot find a source that they used. So what I recommend is anytime you have a quote or a paraphrase, something you want to use, you put quotation marks around it right away, and make sure you put something there so that you know where it came from. You can just copy and paste the URL immediately after the quote. That way you'll know exactly what website it came from. You could write it down. You could just do the entire citation process as you go. You could cite it according to your formatting, MLA, APA, whatever it may be, and do your works cited or reference at the same time. Um, but you have to keep track of it in some way. If you do not, it'll be very easy for you to lose track of what quote came from where, and then it may take hours for you to skim through all your sources and try to find that quote again, and you don't want to have to do that. So it's tedious. I know it's tedious. It's my least favorite part of writing, keeping track of all the sources, but it is important to do. Integrating sources, a little bit more information about that, what I was talking about before as far as signal phrases, saying who the source is. You want to think about kind of strategically what sorts of sources that you use. So one kind of source you may use may help support your opinion. Maybe you have something that you're arguing in your paper and you want to find a reputable source that will make your opinion sound stronger. You want to find someone who agrees with you. That's one reason you may cite. You also may want to present facts or statistics, obviously things you may not know off the top of your head, those exact numbers, but if you have those exact numbers, that again makes your argument more believable. Say, for example, you know for a fact that there's a higher percentage of women represented in colleges than there are men right now. You don't know the exact number. You know that that's true. You can go and find a source, and then you'll have the exact number, and you'll cite it so your readers know where it came from. You may want to identify alternative opinions or explanations. So maybe you want to highlight the opposing view, and you can find a source that would talk about someone who opposes what you think so that then you can argue against it and explain how your point relates. And you also are informing people of where to find further information. So again, imagine that you're publishing your article, your paper on the internet somewhere. When you give your list of sources at the bottom of your page, your readers will say, "Oh, I loved this paper on recycling. Where can I learn more? Oh, yes, right here at the end." So again, it may not actually happen in real life. Your English teacher's probably not going to excitedly go and look at all your sources. But the idea of these essays that you're writing is you're practicing writing professionally. And when a professional writer publishes their stuff out there, people will want to go and click on those links and see the other sources. So it's an important thing to practice as a scholar in your college classes. So here are some example signal phrases. As I mentioned earlier, you may use an author's name, as I mentioned before, according to John Smith. You may mention the title of a work in the movie The Green Mile, blah, 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 blah. You may say Stephen King, popular American writer, something, something, something. So for example, if you're writing a paper about writing, it may be important to note that Stephen King is in fact a writer. He isn't a biologist, he's a writer. That's why what he says is relevant. And you may want to talk about your source's credibility. Again, if you want your readers to believe what you're saying, it helps if you can say, hey, this person who won this and that, they are also in agreement with my statement. That helps you look better as a writer. All right, parting thoughts. One, play it safe. What we mean by that is cite it. When in doubt, cite it. Always cite it. Using the agreed upon format of your class, which is going to vary depending upon the class that you're enrolled in. So always double check and make sure you know how to cite. And then cite, cite, cite. Next, keep track of all your sources. Make sure you know where everything came from. As soon as you pull a quote, mark it in some way so that you'll be able to remember with its color coding, numbers, whatever. Make sure you have all your sources well marked and well tracked. And finally, use resources like the TLC website. There's also a website called the Purdue OWL. Lots of different sources out there. If you have questions about how to cite something, say for example, you're writing an English paper, which is usually an MLA format, you could say citing a website in MLA format. You could type that into Google, and pretty much any academic source you find would be reliable. And what I mean by that is anything that comes from a college or university. So something from Wake Tech's website or UNC Chapel Hill or NC State, all of those citation sources would be reliable to get information on how to cite something. Of course, the first place you should go is Wake Text Resources, but if you can't find what you need there, you can do other searches as well. But it's important not to rely upon, Joe's grammar blog. You want to make sure that you're using reliable academic sources. All right, any questions before I send you off to do your post-test?
Is it okay for me to use a service like EasyBib or Citation
Mm.
Machine, or am I cheating if I do that?
I think it's okay. A lot of times it will not cite things 100% right. I'm glad you brought that up. What I'd recommend is if you do use Citation Machine or EasyBib, something like that, just make sure you double check it with the examples that your instructor provided just to make sure that it's citing it the way you want. Also, make sure that you set it to the correct citation format. A lot of times it'll default to MLA or APA or whatever, and if you use the automatic one, it's going to give you the incorrect citation for your class if that doesn't match your class. So make sure that you have it set to the correct citation format and then double check to make sure it follows the format that your instructor wants. Great question. All right, everybody, take the post test. There should be a link available for you to do that. Make sure that you take the post test so that we know you watched the whole video. I hope to see you again sometime in the TLC and have a great day.
Thank you.